All right, guys, I think we can start with today's module, that's financial accounting. Um, like yesterday, I'll just go over the Zoom etiquette once again. Smith, if you can get to that slide. Yeah, so all of you are requested to turn on your videos if possible and keep your mics on mute. Use the raise hand feature if you have a question, or feel free to drop it in the chat box anytime you like, and we'll make sure that we get back to it. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. All right then. Yeah, So our hosts for the day again are me, Sarah, Sanya, Priyanshi, Kash, and Nikita. Today we'll be doing the second part of the module, that's financial accounting. All right. You do next slide, please. All right. So, guys, while accounting may be, is generally considered a boring feature of entrepreneurship, but it is pretty essential, and we learn why. Whenever we go in for accounting for our firms, there's certain assumptions we make with accounting in general, and this is for all sorts of firms, be it private limited firms, public firms, or LLCs. So there are many more assumptions, but we'll be going over these three main ones today. These are the going concern assumption, consistency assumption, and the accrual assumption. So what the going concern assumption deals with is that within this assumption, we assume that a business shall continue for foreseeable period, and that there's no intention to close down or shut the business's operations. So we operate at least on paper as if no externalities are present whatsoever, and we do not take into account anything that might maybe harm or let's say affect the profits or the operations of a firm in any manner. That is something we deal strategically, but when we talk about accounting, then we purely deal with tangible information. Okay, now the second assumption is called the consistency assumption. According to this assumption, accounting practices once selected and adopted should be applied consistently year after year. So this is an assumption that the government expects of us. So every year, firms and companies, especially at the end of the financial year, report their accounting statements to the government or whatever legal authorities in their country. So those authorities generally expect us to follow one pattern of accounting, so that it's easier for them to let's say give us the clear check for continual operations. Also, as a part of the going concern assumption, I forgot to mention, it's because of this concept that a distinction can be made between what is called a capital expenditure and what's a revenue expenditure. A capital expenditure is one that is generally beneficial for the firm from a long term perspective. So these investments, capital expenditures are made with the long term in mind, and revenue expenditures are expenditures whose benefit will be consumed or exhausted within the accounting period, which is 1 year in most cases. And the universally accepted period for accounting is April to March every year, which again is divided in 4 quarters. All right. So talking about the consistency assumption, this concept helps us better understand accounting information on hand, and it makes it comparable with that of previous years. So if we follow the same pattern of accounting each year, then it's easier to compare results of our own firm, so that we are able to project other goals for our firm's future and the direction of its operations in the coming years. All right. The last assumption is the accrual assumption. According to this assumption, a transaction is recorded in the books of account at the time when it is entered into, and not when the settlement takes place. So this means that any kind of revenue for your firm is recognized when it's realized. That's when the sale is completed or the services are rendered. It's immaterial whether the cash has been received or not. So by this, what I mean by this is, for instance, if let's say you run a trucking company, right? And you were supposed to fulfill an order for, let's say, company B. So the transaction for that order being fulfilled is recorded the moment you deliver the goods, and not when the cash is received. You may have had a verbal contract saying that, all right, maybe the cash is transferred 2 days after the order is received. That won't matter in this situation. As soon as you deliver the goods, you are liable to add that transaction to your books of ledger. Okay. Similarly, expenses are recognized as expenses in the counting period in which the revenue related to it is recognized, whether paid in cash or not. The same goes for expenses. Those expenses are realized the moment that you commit to them and the moment that the service or good related to them have been delivered, and not when the cash is actually received or paid. It goes both ways. Can we get to the next slide, please?
Manav, we have a question.
All right, go ahead.
Vivan asks, consistency also helps in comparing transactions.
One, by consistency, we mean using the same method of accounting each year, using the same standards. So it's easier to compare the firm's results over past years. So, for instance, if let's say the CEO of a company is not satisfied with, let's say, the revenue of the firm, then he or she can look at the past financial statements of the firm, and then maybe they can come to a conclusion on as to what may have caused the decline. All right. So if you choose to account your transactions and everything separately each year, then it becomes really hard to compare. So it's just about a standard, a base level, so that you're able to compare your firm's operations and its performance each year. Does that answer your question, Vivan? All right.
Yeah. You can move ahead.
Okay. All right. So yeah, the three financial statements of a company are income statement or the statement of profit or loss, balance sheet, and cash flow statements. Can we get to the next slide, please? Yeah. So before we go ahead, I'd like to ask you guys a question. Why do you think we analyze financial statements, and who do you think who are the people that would want to analyze a financial statement of a firm, for instance? Just feel free to unmute yourself or type in whatever you feel like in the chat box. Type in your opinion. Why do you think someone would want to analyze the financial statements of a firm, and who would do so? You can use the raise hand feature for answering this question. There are no right or wrong answers. Just give us a piece of your mind. What do you think about this? Okay, Vivan has raised his hand. Vivan, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that the internal users of the information would like to check the profitability of the firm. So it
Yeah.
would help
All right. Yeah, Vivan, you're absolutely correct. There are actually two stakeholders that would want to analyze the financial statements of any firm, the internal and the external stakeholders. Can we get to the next slide, please, Smith? The internal stakeholders are generally the managers in a firm. All right, Valerie also has some to gain insights. Yeah, that's correct, Valerie. To gain insights about profit and losses. Now, the internal stakeholders of a company are generally the managers who use this information in understanding the company's current position and whether or not the company is profitable or is going to be profitable in the coming years, as Vivan suggested. Growing its operations, generating enough cash to meet obligations, and pursuing new opportunities. Shareholders also use them to keep tabs on how their capital is being managed. So, for instance, if you've bought shares in a certain firm, then you would obviously want to know how your company is performing. And external stakeholders. External stakeholders include investors. It's important to analyze financial statements to provide investors with important information regarding the company's operations. So if you're looking to invest in a company, you'd obviously want to look at all financial data that they have from past years so that you're able to make a sound investment decision, specifically whether or not to invest in the company and if the price is correct in the market. If you think the company is overvalued, you would not want to buy a stock of that company. All of that information you're able to gather from the financial statements of a firm. Lenders and suppliers also routinely examine financial statements to determine the credit worthiness of the companies that they deal with. So again, if you take the example of, let's say, manufacturing business that mainly operates on credit, their credit givers, banks, maybe their own suppliers would want to check their financial statements to so that they're sure and they have that peace of mind that they'll get their money back in time. So yeah, that's about it. Can we get to the next slide, please, Smith? Do you guys have any questions regarding this? All right. Yep, just feel free to put them in the chat box. So, okay. So let's get to the balance sheet. A company's balance sheet provides information on what the company is worth from a book value perspective. The balance sheet is broken into three categories and provides summation of the company's assets, liabilities, and shareholders' equity on a specific date. This date generally is the end of the accounting year, but most companies, especially big firms, they generally also publish balance sheets on a quarterly basis for the investors to keep tabs on. In many cases, the assets minus liabilities is viewed as the book value or equity of the firm. So yeah, this is the standard accounting equation. That's assets equals to liabilities plus owner's equity. Can we get to the next slide, please, Smith? All right. So here we're looking at Reliance's balance sheet. Now, you guys must observe it's written standalone. You see the word standalone before balance sheet. So there are two kinds of balance sheets. There's standalone balance sheets and consolidated balance sheets. The difference between the two is simple. Now, a company like Reliance, for instance, has many subsidiaries. So a consolidated balance sheet generally includes it includes financial data of all their subsidiaries as well. However, a standalone balance sheet just talks about that particular firm. So, for instance, if Reliance is has registered itself as Reliance Limited, right? This, I'm pretty sure, talks about their petrochemicals business. But if you see, let's say, the balance sheet of Geo, Reliance Geo, then that could be separate. But again, now that would be a standalone balance sheet. You would also go to their website and look at the consolidated balance sheet, which would include their revenue from all their subsidiaries. All right. So a balance sheet is divided into assets and liabilities. Starting with the assets, there are two types of assets, non-current assets and current assets. Non-current assets are assets that a firm invests in for the long term, and current assets are assets that are short-term assets, and and let's say they're utilized and are generally expected to expire within the accounting period, which again is 1 year. Examples of non-current assets can be property, plant, equipment, land, and capital work in progress as well. Now, what does capital work in progress mean? Capital work in progress means an asset that is currently in the building. For instance, for a construction firm, that may be a bridge that they're constructing, right? Now, maybe they estimate the value of the bridge to be, let's say, 100 million. Now, looking at the looking at the material that has gone into it and the current value according to market estimations is called the capital work in progress value of that project. For instance, if they've just started building, or let's say they're halfway done, then they can comfortably write $50 million in against capital work in progress in their balance sheet at the end of the accounting period. Okay, after that we have intangible assets. So again, assets are divided in tangible and intangible. Tangible assets are assets that you can touch and feel, like building, machinery, anything that you can basically touch. And an intangible asset generally deals with digital property of a firm, for instance, patents, copyrights, licenses, etc. Okay. Then we have financial assets. Wait, we have intangible assets under development. Yeah, intangible assets under development are similar to capital work in progress, except where here we talk about digital assets like patents, maybe a patent that's due for approval from whatever patent registry that the country follows. Okay, now under financial assets, we have investments and loans. Now you might see loans written over here, but loans over here does not mean loans that the firm has taken. Instead, these mean loans that the firm has given out. That is why they're mentioned in assets. Otherwise, loans mentioned liabilities generally refer to loans that a company has taken and owes. But these are loans that are owed to the firm. So these are loans that Reliance gave out to, let's say, other firms or maybe high net worth individuals. Now we see a section called other non-current assets. Other non-current assets can be any number of miscellaneous assets, and information regarding these is generally in what's called an audited report. So that's a report that the chartered accountant of the firm makes. And these are assets. No one generally questions the value of these assets and their calculation, but just in case the government does, they mention separate notes. Like you might see there's a notes column. So these notes generally expand more on what these assets actually entail. Okay. Smith, can you get back to that slide, please? You're not done yet. Thank you. Okay. Coming back, okay, talking about current assets. Current assets include inventories, financial assets again, and other current assets. Inventories refer to your stock for a manufacturing company. Again, that could be their raw material, a material that they use for construction, etc. Is basically stock that you have in your warehouse that you are yet to use for providing whatever good or service that you deal in. Inventories for Reliance Navy could be ships that they have because they have a shipping business as well. And yeah, that's basically it, the stock that you have. Financial assets. Now these are financial assets. Now investments over here again are investments that are on a short-term basis because we are dealing in current assets here. So these are investments that they've given out for a short-term period. Investments that they've made for the short-term period and whose value they believe they will realize within 1 year. The same goes for loans over here. These are short-term loans that they expect to recover within the accounting period, within 1 year. Trade receivables. Now, as you guys must have read, trade receivables is a fancy way of saying debtors. So these are now trade receivables specifically talks about debtors from an operation standpoint. So these could be suppliers of Reliance that owe money to Reliance, or suppliers. These could be suppliers. They could be strategic partners. They could be it's the government also sometimes. Now, the difference between trade receivables and loans is that loans are not for are not directly linked with their operations. So if they give out a loan, it's generally to a third party that is not in their line of work and has taken out a loan for carrying out their own operations or meeting their own obligations. Now, other current assets, again, is something that we can overlook at the moment. All right, now this page has been pretty heavy content wise. So do you guys have any questions at all about non-current assets or current assets? Feel free to raise your hand if you have any doubts about anything that's mentioned on this page that I may have forgotten to cover or you're unsure about. I think you guys did your pre-reading well. Let's go to the next page, man. All right, equity and liabilities. Now, equity generally, now equity consists of equity share capital and other equity. Equity share capital again deals with the equity shares, outstanding equity shares of a company. So these are company shares that shareholders own. And all right, other equity generally refers to equity with private individuals. So there's this thing called private placement. I'll tell you how that's different. So when, for instance, ordinary people like you and me buy shares of a company, we buy them from a stock exchange, right? But high net worth individuals generally buy these shares separately. So these shares, a certain block of shares sometimes is opened up to certain privileged individuals. So these guys don't buy them like you and me. They buy huge blocks of shares, generally millions and billions of dollars. So these are huge transactions. So these take place privately for certain individuals, and those a company is obligated to list separately, like Reliance has done over here. Okay. Non-current liabilities. Non-current liabilities, like the word non-current suggests, talks about long-term liabilities of firm, long-term obligations that it has to meet. Financial liabilities over here, yeah, here the word borrowing or loan could be interchanged. Now these are loans that Reliance has taken and owes to other third parties. Now these are loans that Reliance has to pay. Then we have what we call provisions. So what are provisions? Now every firm, uh, let's all right. Each firm has certain provisions and reserves. Provisions for anything bad that happens. Big companies like Reliance are always move ahead with, let's say, caution. So they have what's called a provision for contingency. So they forecast events that might happen. For instance, let's say in the event of an earthquake, right? They might lose important factories or key locations of manufacture. So they generally make separate provisions for such damages so that in case they do happen, their operations are not affected. Provisions are just basically amounts of money set aside for certain problems or certain liabilities they anticipate in the future. They may or may not happen, but a company still goes safely, and that is what you should do as an entrepreneur too. You should always set aside some money for anything, any risk that you see, any threat that you foresee at the time of starting your business, so that nothing, for instance, no one had provisions for a pandemic, for example. Now from the COVID-19 pandemic, maybe firms in the future will be more cautious about this as well. They'll probably have a provision for pandemics. All right. uh, Now we have what's called deferred tax liabilities. Now I'll not go into too much detail with what that is because it's pretty complicated. But you can just say within accounting there are all right, there are certain laws in countries. So yeah, I'll just put it simply. What this means is that this is tax that Reliance has to pay but has not paid. This is tax that they've deferred to pay in future years. This is something Amazon also does. Big companies are generally given this sort of leeway if they have a lot of financial burden in a particular year. They are allowed. They're given tax concessions even, but if not, then they're allowed a longer period of time to pay. But since they owe something to the government, they mention it as a liability on their balance sheet. Okay. Then moving on, we have other non-current liabilities. Current liabilities. Current liabilities again are short-term liabilities, and these can include borrowings, short-term borrowings, trade payables. Yeah, trade payables. Trade payables are just like creditors. These are interchangeable terms again. Trade payables means creditors money that they owe to, again, strategic partners, suppliers, anyone that they buy their raw materials from. Micro and so small, yeah. Now again, this year when Reliance mentioned their trade payables, if they're talking about micro and small enterprise, so they owe some money to micro and small enterprises, small businesses that they tie up with, let's say in rural areas. Other than micro and small enterprises, so they've mentioned separate amounts for maybe larger firms. Other financial liabilities is again that something we don't need to go into. Provisions. Now these are short-term provisions, and the provisions in the non-current liabilities were long-term provisions. Again, something like a provision for an earthquake, for instance, would be a long-term provision, right? Because you cannot directly foresee an earthquake happening. It's something that just happens on random. So a provision like that is generally long-term provision, and a short-term provision could be a provision for doubtful debts. A provision for doubtful debts generally means, now, for instance, you have creditors, right? Everybody is not as loyal as you in a business. Sometimes your debtors are clumsy. Sometimes they refuse to pay. Other you have to give them let's say leeway. So these are again provisions for those. Companies generally make provisions for doubtful debts to avoid again a stoppage in their operations. They foresee a certain number of debtors not paying their dues in time in advance, so they set aside a separate amount of money for that. Okay, now then we have the total of current liabilities. um, and yeah, that's about it, is the total. Do we have any questions from this, guys? Because again, this was a lot of new information for you to take in. Do you have any questions at all? Okay, moving on to the statement of profit and loss. The statement of profit and loss is also called the income statement, and it shows the direct, indirect, and capital expenses incurred and the revenue earned by a company. The income statement offers a great deal of transparency on the company's activities. So this generally talks about their day-to-day activities instead of the assets and the liabilities they hold. It's also a key driver of the company's other two financial statements. So yeah, profit and loss is generally something that investors focus a lot on. Can we move to the next page, please, Smith? Okay, so the profit and loss statement of a company is divided into income and expenses. All right. Under income, Reliance has classified it as value of sales and income from services. So Reliance has classified their income into goods and services. So income from goods, like you can see over here for the year 2019-20 was 362,869 crores. So yeah, these are unfathomable amounts of money, but that's how it is for firms like that. And then a value of sales and services revenue. Yeah, all right. Over here, you see revenue from operations. This again is a fancy way of saying net profit, the net profit of a firm in any given accounting year. And it is a standard norm to generally include the values for the previous year for all financial, for at least the profit and loss statement and the balance sheet, so that it's easier for investors to compare directly with the results of the previous year. You can look up for results up to 25 years before the current date, but yeah, it is a standard norm for all companies to present at least 2 years worth of financial data at any given point of time. Okay, moving on to expenses. We have something that's called cost of material consumed. This is also called cost of goods sold. Now, this directly includes costs incurred during manufacturing. During manufacturing of goods or procurement of whatever services that the company provides. For a manufacturing business, this could be the cost of raw materials, the cost of small machinery parts, the cost of repairs that they incur, etc. So cost that is directly associated with producing the good or the service that you provide. Then we have purchase of stock in trade. So stock in trade, like I told you, stock in trade refers to the stock of goods and services, that the stock of goods that you keep with you. For instance, if you were, let's say, a denim manufacturer, you're going to have a certain stock, certain amount of denim kept in the warehouse ready for shipping at any point of time. So purchase of stock in trade refers to the amount of money that you spent on purchasing that stock. Purchasing that stock to sell later. Then we see changes in inventories of finished goods, work in progress, and stock in trade. All right. Now, changes in inventory of finished goods, work in progress, and stock in trade. Now, when they talk about changes in a profit and loss statement generally means the opening value minus the closing value. So, for instance, you had, let's say, 100 meters of cloth. Let's say 100 meters of let's say 100 kilograms of cloth in the beginning of the year, and you had 20 kilograms of cloth at the end of the year. Now, this could be cloth. It's also important to mention over here, you don't just directly assume that the missing amount was sold. If you have 100 in the beginning and 20 in the end, it does not mean directly that the 80 kilograms of cloth was sold. It could mean any number of things. It could be maybe 50 kilograms of cloth was sold and maybe the remaining 30 was damaged. But the starting and ending values is what we are talking about here. So that's the change. The difference between what you had when you started and what you have when you end the financial year. This goes for all three of these things. Then we have what's called excise duty. So excise duty generally refers to the amount of money you pay for transportation. It could be amount of money you pay for transportation. It could be toll that you pay when you cross borders, interstate borders. It could be duty that you pay when your goods arrive in a new country. Those kinds of governmental charges. And then employee benefits expenses. So in past modules, we learned that companies generally spend a lot of money on keeping their employees motivated. So employee benefit expense is an example of just that. There are many companies that you guys must have heard of 401ks in the United States, right? So an example of an employee benefit expense could be a 401k or let's say, an employee provident fund. So what that is, for instance, if you earn, let's say, $25,000 per month, all right, out of that $25,000, the firm takes, let's say, $5,000, or let's say $2,000, right? $2,000 of your money, and they add $2,000 from their end to make $4,000. So this $4,000 you save per month out of your own salary, and the total of this sum you receive when you retire. So this is, in simple terms, this is a savings account that the firm maintains for you, so that when you retire, along with your salary, you also have a saved amount of money that you gathered during the year. Okay, moving on, we have finance costs. Now, finance costs here do not refer to loans, because this is an expense. Here, finance cost refers to the cost that a firm incurs when raising finance. For instance, when you go in for an IPO, when you go for an IPO or an FPO, which is a public offer, basically, it's a way of raising finance in the stock market. Then you need to pay a lot of money to governmental authorities for clerical work. There's you pay money to brokers, you pay money to the stock exchange as well. So basically, money incurred, expenses incurred when you raise finance or capital for your firm. That is what a finance costs entail. Then we have depreciation or amortization, depletion expenses. All right. Now, depreciation and amortization. Okay. Depreciation refers to the fall in the value of your asset. For instance, you bought, let's say, 1 acre of land in 2005. Now, the value of the land wouldn't be the same today, right? You cannot, you'll obviously record at that historical cost, but you can use depreciation as an expense over here, because in a way you're, okay, how do I put this? For depreciation, okay, I'll in simple terms, it's basically the imputed loss of your asset. For instance, your phone, let's say, your phone, if it's worth 50,000 rupees the day you buy it, it does not remain the same. Its worth does not remain 50,000 after 1 year, right? If you go out to sell it a year later, you'll probably fetch 20,000 if you're lucky. So now that is an imputed loss. You don't directly lose that cash, but the value of your asset decreases. So that's an indirect expense that firms mention on their profit and loss statements. And there's a difference between depreciation and amortization. Depreciation is generally on tangible assets like land, plant, machinery, a mobile phone. But amortization is depreciation for intangible assets like patents, copyrights, licenses. Your licenses expired, so their value decreases. So that is again an imputed expense. It isn't money that directly goes out of your pocket. It's just that the value decreases, so you can use that as an expense on your profit and loss statement. Do you guys have any questions about depreciation or anything that I've covered so far?
There's a question. Sayam asks, do private companies also have to present their P&L?
Okay, Sayam, I think by private companies, you mean companies that are not publicly listed on a stock exchange, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Sayam, all companies have to present their financial statements to the government. It's just that with companies that are public, this information is accessible online. But for a company that's private and is not listed on a stock exchange, or whose operations are not at that level, you'll not be able to find their data online. But yeah, every company has to prepare these financial statements, because at the end you have to pay tax and you have to report to whatever local authorities are in wherever you operate. So yeah, all companies make these statements. Okay. Do you guys have any questions about depreciation? Because that's, yeah, it's a little complicated. Okay. Just feel free to put them in the chat box at any time, or feel free to use the raise hand feature to directly ask them. Moving ahead, profit before exceptional, profit before exceptional items and tax. So what does exceptional items here mean? Exceptional items here mean money that you earn from anything that is not your main business. For instance, you bought a land, you bought a piece of land for, let's say, 20,000 rupees, all right, and then you end up selling it for 50,000. But you are not a real estate company. then that gain is what we call an exceptional item, because that's not something that would happen uh, in, let's say, the ordinary course of your operations, right? If you are a company that manufactures hats and you just happen to sell a piece of your land and make a profit on it, you can't really call it your profit because it's not profit from your operations. And it's something, it's like a one time thing. It just happened once, in the past 10 years. So that is why firms need to separate that income from their operations income on their profit and loss statements. Thus the term exceptional item, because that's an item that does not it's something that it's a transaction that does not take place in your regular course of operations during your accounting period. Okay, then tax expenses is, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's tax that you pay. Again, there's current tax that they're supposed to pay this year, and deferred tax that they have permission to pay at a future date. Then we have profit for the year and other comprehensive income. So other comprehensive income is a little tricky. Now we have four sub items here. The first one being items that will not be reclassified to profit or loss. Oh, okay. So other comprehensive income basically means, let's say, income by luck. You could call it luck by chance. So for instance, you trade with companies overseas, all right, and let's say the value of the Indian rupee happens to increase on the day that you make the transaction. So that just means a gain for you that you had not anticipated. It's just indirect. Let's say $50 is roughly, I think the exchange rate is 57 right now. For calculation purposes, let's take it as 60, right? So $50 would mean 3,000 rupees. Okay. If, for instance, on the day that they make the transaction, the value of the dollar increases to 65, then instead of 3,000 rupees, you'll have 65 times 50, which is 3,250 rupees. Now you got an extra 250 rupees from them without their intention of doing that. So they didn't want to pay you extra. You just happened to receive extra money because the value of the currency of your country increased. So that is again, which is an other comprehensive, that's something that's classified as an other comprehensive income, and it goes both ways. If the value of the rupee decreases on that day, if instead of 60, it falls down to 50, it won't change your contract because they contracted for $50. It does not matter what the exchange rate on that day is. That this is just sheer luck for you guys, for a firm. So yeah, that again could be a loss in this case. That could be an other comprehensive. This could be items that will not be reclassified to profit or loss. There's something that you can't reclassify to profit or loss. That is something you can't include. But how it's an expense, but you still can't include it. You can't actually count it because it was beyond your control, and yeah, you didn't directly take part in it. It was just the currency rate, and that is why you gained or lost whatever money you did. It's generally small amounts of money because these fluctuations generally are not that the currency market just in general isn't that turbulent. So these fluctuations are generally in really small amounts of money. So they don't make a lot of difference. But again, just because we're looking at it, I've explained it to you. This is not something that's really important to anybody, any investor. It's just an obligation to mention. Okay, then we have the total of comprehensive income for the year. Now, for instance, you see a bracket over here, 7,074 crores, and you see a bracket. Now, a bracket basically means negative. By negative, this means it's a loss for the firm. They don't directly write minus, they just put a bracket around it. A bracket around anything that you see on any financial statement refers to a loss. If it's not positive, then that means it's a loss. Yeah. Okay. Then lastly, we have earnings per equity share of face value of rupees 10 each. Now, earning per equity share. All right, I'll tell you the formula first. Now, what does earning per equity share means? This means the amount of money that a shareholder earns per share of the company. The formula for this is revenue from operations. That's the net profit for the year, divided by the number of outstanding shares of the firm in the market. So that is what this is about. And face value, again, face value of a share is the amount of money that the share was released for. For instance, if you see the share of a company trade at 700 rupees, it isn't really necessary that the company released it at that value. Whatever difference there is called a premium value that investors pay. And the premium depends from company to company. It just depends on the goodwill of your company, the brand image of a company. For instance, for a company like Nike, investors are always ready to invest in a company like Nike, right? So they pay any extra amount of money to get hold of a share for Nike. So that is what that is. But a company is obligated to mention the face value or the original value that the share is worth on their profit and loss statement. Okay, I guess we've reached the end of the profit and loss statement. Do you guys have any questions at all? Because this is a lot of new information for most of you. So do you have any questions at all about anything that's written on this profit and loss statement? Any term that you did not understand, anything at all? Guys, all right. Moving on. All right, over to you, Sanya, for cash flow.
Okay, so we'll talk about cash flow statements and cash flow analysis now. So cash flow is basically a statement of a company which shows the inflow and outflow of cash and cash equivalents. So what cash and cash equivalents are, like checks, short-term investments, short-term deposits at the bank, those sort of things. So those sort of things come under cash and cash equivalents, and that is what we are evaluating in a cash flow analysis. So it happens during a given period of time under three activities categorized as operating, investing, and financing. So it helps with short-term planning and efficient cash management of the company. This is why we have a separate statement for just cash transactions. So it does not record non-cash transactions at all. So it doesn't have trade receivables, trade payables, because those are non-cash transactions. And so transactions that increase cash and cash equivalents are called inflows, and transactions that decrease them are known as outflows of cash and cash equivalents. Moving on. Okay, so these are some examples of cash and cash inflows and cash inflows and outflows. So for inflows, we see cash sales. So non-cash sales are not recorded in the statement. Receipts from trade debtors. So when you receive cash, you record it in this statement. Sale of fixed assets, as you must have read in our pre-readings. Fixed assets are assets which you buy as an investment, like furniture, machinery, all of that stuff. And interest on bank balances. So when you have an account in the bank and you may earn interest on it, so you record that in the statement. Grants from the government, loans from the bank, share capital invested. So if you invest somewhere, then you record it here. Then for outflows, payments to suppliers, wages and salaries, payments for fixed assets, tax on profits. So you pay government, you pay taxes to the government. So those tax on the profits you earn are also called cash outflows. Interest on loans and overdrafts. So you take loans from the bank, they are recorded as outflows of cash. We're talking about mainly short-term loans, and overdrafts are basically when you have a current account. So businesses have current account with the banks. So when you transact over your let's say your balance, it's called an overdraft. So it's sort of a short-term loan from the bank, which is why it is reported as cash outflow. Now you pay dividends to the shareholders, and then you repay loans you take from third parties. So these are some examples of inflows and outflows. Can you guys think of any more examples? I'll give you 30 seconds to write something in the chat, or maybe unmute yourselves. Anything you think would count as a cash inflow or outflow? Loans. Yeah. So loans would, so if you give loans, that would be an outflow. And if you receive a loan, that would be an inflow. All right. Customer payments. Uh, yeah. So if you sell something for cash and you receive a payment, then that's your inflow. And investment, yeah, short-term investments come under cash and cash equivalents. Okay. Moving on. Okay, so the cash flow activities are classified as operating, investing, and financing activities. So in operating activities, we include cash activities related to net income. The principal revenue producing activities. So for example, receipts from sale of goods and services, and it's an example of operating activity, cash inflow. And payment for goods and services is a cash outflow, which comes under which we record under specifically operating activity. When I discuss the structure of a cash flow statement, you'll see that how operating activities, investing and financing, you can see the separation between these three activities and how they're added and subtracted at the end, and we calculate the inflow and outflow balance. So investing activities, these include cash activities related to non-current assets. So acquisition and sale of long-term assets, which are long-term as in non-current assets. If you have read the pre-readings, you will get this. That what's the difference between, like Manav also explained, long-term and short-term assets, and other investments which are not included in cash and cash equivalents. So those are included as investing. So for example, if you pay when you're purchasing a fixed asset and you make a payment for that, so that's an outflow which will be recorded under an investing activity. And receipts from sale of securities. So if you sell securities of your company for cash, it would be included in investing activities. And financing activities, these include cash activities related to non-current liabilities and owner's equity. So these result in a change in the size and composition of owner's capital and equity, and borrowings of the enterprise from other resources. So for example, proceeds from issue of shares. So if you issue shares in the market and you get cash for that, so you're getting finance to your company. So that's included in financing activities. And if you pay interest on debentures, so there are shares and there are debentures. We discussed this yesterday. So for debentures are basically long term, and you're supposed to pay interest on that. So if you pay interest, that also comes under financial activities. Moving on, we'll look at the structure of a cash flow statement. So I'm not going into the details as this is quite complicated to understand, but this is just the structure of how you actually make a cash flow statement, and then you see what you include or not include in all those activities. So for operating, so the first thing you'll see when I discuss the structure later would be operating activities. So we start with net income. Then so plus means add and minus means subtract. So for net income, you add all the net income. It includes profits, and some other things we'll see in the next slide. Then depreciation, you add depreciation. Then loss on sale of assets. Then you subtract gain on sale of investments, changes in working capital. So I'm not going to go into the details, but this is just to show you what the structure is. Then investing activity, you add the proceeds from sale of investments and also the sale of assets, but you subtract the purchase of assets as it is an outflow. So you're adding inflows and you're subtracting outflows. So for financing activities, if you issue new capital, share capital, you'll add it. New debt, if you repay a debt, you'll subtract it as it's an outflow, and also dividend payments. So this is basically the structure of a cash flow statement. Next, we'll discuss the cash flow statement of Reliance. So again, it's a standalone cash flow statement. So you can see part A here, cash flow from operating activities. So we are comparing 2019-20 and 18-19, and all of this is in rupee crores. So we started with net profit before tax as per the statement of profit and loss. So we bring it down from the statement of profit and loss which you make before this, and you just basically bring that down as it is. Then adjusted for, it means you're adding or subtracting all of these things as I discussed, how you um, include stuff in operating activities. So loss on buyback of debentures. I'm not going to go into the details of what everything actually is because it gets quite complicated. But I mean, just to give you an idea what a cash flow statement is, then we add depreciation or amortization, um, effect of change, exchange rate change, net gain from financial assets, tax, dividend income. All of this stuff is basically what you adjust for in your net profit. Um, and then operating profit before working capital changes. So working capital is basically your investment, your trade receivables, trade payables, all of that. So this is before. So you keep on getting a sum, and then you just write it so that you can, when you, so for a point you calculate what's going on, and then you add or subtract stuff after that. Um, and that's how you keep track of what's happening in your statements. So then you adjust it for your working capital changes, um, then cash generated from operations, then at last you um, subtract the tax paid for the year, and then you get the net cash flow from operating activities. This is how cash flow from operating activities is made. Then B part, we move on to cash flow from investing activities. So for investing activities, again, you have purchase of um, purchase of your non-current assets and sale of your non-current assets. So you can see purchase of property, plant, equipment. Um, then there's some other things which are really complicated for you to understand, even for us. Then investments for subsidies, trusts, all of that stuff in other investments. And basically, there's not much in investing activities or even financing activities, but that's all you include. And then dividend, that's all you include. And then you get your net cash flow from investing activities. Then C part, cash flow from financing activities. You can see that the first thing they have mentioned is equity share capital. So you issue new equity share capital, and then you include that firstly. Then share application money. So when you issue share capital, there are stages of how you receive money. So application money is basically the first stage of how you receive your share capital money. So that's share application money. Then some other stuff, borrowings, dividends paid, interest paid on borrowings, all of that. And then you get your net cash flow from financing activities. So after you get these three ABC sums, you add them, and then you get net increase or decrease in cash and cash equivalents. And then you actually add the opening balance of your cash and cash equivalents. So this is the by the end of the year, and that's by the that's what you had at the starting. And then the closing balance of cash and cash equivalents should basically come out to be what it is. When we make a cash flow statement, we need to make sure that it comes out to be equal to a certain amount. But that's basically the structure of a cash flow statement. Do you guys have any questions now?
Yeah, guys, feel free to put your question in the chat box or unmute yourself and ask them.
Okay, you can write them in the chat box if you want later.
Right. So let's talk about break even. So uh, break even is initially a point where a firm will need to calculate how many units or exactly what level of output it needs to sell to cover its cost. And this level of output covers where the cost is equal to revenue, so where the total cost of the business is equal to is equal to the total revenue earned by it, which is also known as the break even point. And at this point a business will neither make a profit or loss, so it doesn't make a profit and neither a loss at this point, at the break even point. So businesses, usually break even is especially important for any startups or any businesses that engage in some sort of new ventures, so as to establish any minimum number of products that they will need to sell in order to cover their cost. And while dealing with break even, a common terminology or a jargon would be contribution. Contribution is an important concept when determining the overall profitability, which is brought by a product in the business. So contribution can be used in calculating how many products needs to be sold in order to cover the firm's cost of production. That is the minimum number of products that a firm needs to sell in order to cover its cost. And it therefore determines how much a product contributes to its fixed cost and profit after deducting its variable cost. The formula for contribution per unit would be price per unit minus variable cost per unit. So please keep these formulas in mind. After that we'll be solving some problems and the formulas will come in use. So when talking about contribution, the per unit contribution would be price per unit of the product minus the variable cost per unit. And while calculating the another way of contribution would also be total revenue minus total cost. Yeah, next slide please, Smith. Yeah, right. So what is exactly the use of break even? So first would be creating a new business. Yeah, so starting or creating a new business. In order to start a new business, a break in even analysis is a must thing. Not only it helps to decide whether the idea of starting a business is viable, but it will also force the startup to be realistic about its cost. And this is the major point. Is something very crucial when starting a new business, because it will force the startup to be realistic about its cost of production, and it will also provide a basis for designing its pricing strategy or something. Another would be creating a product. So in case of the existing business, the companies should still perform a break-even analysis before launching a new product. So even if a company exists in a market, they should still opt for a break-even analysis before they launch a new product in the market. Because particularly if such a product is going to add a significant expenditure in the future sales. The third point of the use of break-even would be changing a business model. So if a company is about to change its business model, like switching from wholesale to retail business, then a break-even analysis must be performed. The cost could change considerably from break-even analysis, which will help in setting the new selling price of its product. Yeah. Then we move on to involvement of cost and revenue. So the basic cost and revenues are involved in the break even are the fixed cost, variable cost, total cost, and total revenue. So fixed costs are is any amount of money that a business has to pay even with zero levels of output. So even if a business doesn't produce anything, they still have to pay these fixed costs, be it electricity or rent. Then we move on to variable cost, which involves that the variable cost increases with the increase in the level of output. So the higher the output, the higher the variable cost. Say for example, labor. In a label manufacturing industry, if there's tailor work, the more the demand for the product, the more the number of laborers hired, and therefore the more the variable cost. So the variable cost will increase with the increase in the level of output. Then we have total cost and revenues. So moving on to formulas, fixed cost. So total cost is a mixture of fixed cost and variable cost. When we add these, we get when we add the fixed cost and variable cost, we get the product, which is the total cost. The total to find out the total revenue, we multiply price with quantity. So the price of the good multiplied by the quantity of the good that is sold. Uh, Another formula would be break-even quantity. I would again notify that please make a note of these formulas somewhere. It will be really helpful. And yeah, so the break-even quantity would be fixed cost upon contribution per unit. So first we learn about what is contribution, and now in order to calculate the break-even, we're using that formulas and that concept to get the desired solution. So break-even quantity would be fixed cost upon contribution per unit, and break-even revenue would be fixed cost upon contribution per unit into price per unit. Yeah, I can understand this is a little technical, but again, this is very crucial when determining the break-even analysis. Yeah. Next slide, Smith. Moving on to the graphical representation. So break-even is usually represented in a graphical illustration. So it includes the fixed cost, variable cost, the total cost and revenues, and at the end, a break-even point is determined. So fixed costs are, we know that fixed costs are constant at a particular level, and therefore they're represented by the horizontal line, the horizontal dotted line, which is labeled fixed cost. So these fixed costs are always horizontal. And moving on to variable cost, so we know that with no units of output, there will be no variable cost. Therefore, the variable cost line starts from the zero, which is also known as the origin, right? Uh, and since the fixed costs still have to be paid with no output produced, the total cost line begins from where the fixed cost line started. So the total cost line actually begins from the point where the fixed cost line is stretched. We can see that, right? And the break-even point is at the end. The break-even point is the point where the total cost line intersects the total revenue line, and at this point, the cost and revenues are equal, and that is when the P1 and Q1 are intersecting. That is labeled as the break-even point. And then the left side of the break-even is represented by the red. Red color indicates any losses that is made by the firm, and the right side is indicating any profit that is made by the firm, right? Yeah, I hope this is clear while we're representing the break-even concept in a graphical manner, which is more easier to understand the concept itself. Right. So let's move on to the next question. Before solving the question, do we have any questions in mind? Because we will be using the formulas and the content that we recently learned. If you have any questions, then please turn on the mic or write it in the chat box. Right. So I'm assuming that everyone is thorough with the concept. So we can quickly solve a question. It's a problem-solving question. You can take your time and answer it in chat box or speak with the mic as you're comfortable. But please attempt this question and give us the solution. Then we will discuss it later. If you have any doubts, then please raise your hand. I'll be looking for answers. Right, I can see a response. Yes. Uh, so I'll be waiting for some more responses, and then we can discuss the scenario. Right, very well. Right, I can see quite a few responses. I think we can now discuss. Is there anyone who did not understand the question itself? I'll be more than happy to explain it, or else we can move towards the solution part. Right, Prisha. So let's start with understanding the question, the scenario. So Colin is the managerial accountant in charge of the company A, where he sells water bottles. So, and he previously determined that the fixed cost of a company A consists of property taxes, a lease, and the executive salaries, which add to $100,000. So we now know that the fixed cost is $100,000, which is already mentioned in the case study. And then it says that the variable cost associated with the producing of one water bottle is $2 per unit. So now we have the fixed cost and the variable cost. Then this it says that the water bottle is sold at a premium price of $12. Now we have the price, the fixed cost, and the variable cost. The question says calculate the break even quantity. So we have learned that break even quantity involves calculating the break even quantity involves the use of formulas, and the break even quantity equals to contribution per unit upon fixed cost, right? We know that. We've recently learned that. So to calculate the contribution per unit will be price per unit upon variable cost per unit. So the price would be $12 upon variable cost, which is $2. And if we uh, try to frame it technically, then the break-even quantity would be $10,000 upon $12 minus $2, which is fixed cost upon contribution per unit, which is also the price upon a variable cost per unit, right? Then so we do that, we divide $100,000 upon 12 minus $2. We eventually get the answer, which is $10,000, which I can see quite a few correct responses. So no, contribution is not $12. The premium price of one water bottle is $12. We calculate contribution by subtracting price minus variable cost. So the price is $12 minus the variable cost, which is $2. So the contribution per unit will be $10, right? Now we simply divide the fixed cost upon contribution. So $100 upon 10, which will be $10,000. 100, yeah. I hope that clears. If there's any doubt, you can quickly ask me. Okay, thank you.
Now, before starting with our next topic, we have a question for you all. Let's say that you want to start a coffee shop on a rental place which is fully furnished. So now you have to analyze what all expenses will you incur on a regular basis to run that coffee shop. Please name the expenses in the chat box so we can discuss upon the topic. Rent, lease, taxes, salary, wages. Yes, correct. The cost of coffee beans, correct. Raw materials, yes. Cost of production. I think that's all the responses. Let's move on to the next slide to understand the concept better. Okay, so all the costs that you guys named are a part of managerial costs. Managerial costs are nothing but basically the costs that a business needs to incur to manage all its expenses. There are many types of costs, but we particularly have two types which are fixed and variable, as Priyanshi covered in the last topic. So we'll brief upon these topics further. Next slide, please. First is fixed cost. As the name suggests, that fixed cost is a particular level of cost that is to be covered regardless of the output of the firm. Now we'll take the example of coffee shop and understand this. For example, we have hired employees, like 3 to 4 employees. We need to provide them salary which has been fixed at a particular amount, regardless of the amount of coffee that we sell. Even if we sell less and even if we run into losses, it's not the employee's fault, and we'll have to provide them a fixed salary. Next thing is that as we can see in the graph, it is a straight line parallel to x-axis. This is because the cost is fixed and has to be incurred at any cost. Now there is a note. Fixed costs are in respect to short-term changes in the level of output only. This is because a company might introduce many new assets in the long term, and so the fixed cost can change. For example, a company is working in a particular area right now, so the rent will be for example 10,000 rupees. Furthermore, if it doubles the area, then the rent will be double. So fixed cost should be determined in short term. Next slide, please. Next, we have variable costs. These costs are in direct proportion with the level of outputs. If the output doubles, then the cost will double, and if the output is 0, then the variable cost will be 0 as well. Now for a coffee shop, we can say that raw material, which is coffee seeds, as someone mentioned, the cost of coffee seeds will be dependent upon the number of coffee that we sell. So if our sales increase, we'll have to buy more seeds, and if our sales decrease, we'll have to buy less seeds. That is variable cost. We can see that the graph is an upward sloping line. So the variable cost is directly in proportion with the output. Next slide, please. We have a few more types of costs. First, we have semi-variable costs, which are costs that have a proportion of both fixed cost and variable costs. Let's understand this in a simple way. For example, we decide to install a telephone on our coffee shop. So for that telephone, we will have a fixed line rental, which is to be paid every month, and the rest depends on the number of calls that we make from the phone. The graph of semi-variable costs will have no defined slope. However, it can be it will definitely be an upward sloping graph, but it can be either in a curved form or a stepped form. Next slide, please. Next, we have total costs. This cost is pretty simple. It is the sum total of all the costs that an organization will incur. Total cost will never be 0, as fixed costs will always be incurred, and so the graph will start from the point of the fixed cost and will increase as the variable and semi-variable costs increase. Next slide, please. Next up, we have direct and indirect costs. Direct costs are very much like variable costs, but they are concerned with particularly one department or one product. Now let's say that there is a demand of Arabica more than Robusta. Arabica and Robusta are two types of coffee seeds. So if the demand of Arabica is more, we'll purchase more seeds of Arabica and less of Robusta. So the cost of these seeds in particular is dependent on their particular sale and not the sale of output as a whole. Indirect costs are related to the output somewhat, but not in a direct manner, or we can say that they are not related to any particular product or department. They can be known as overhead expenses as well. For example, the costs of maintaining a brewing machine at a coffee shop is somehow related to the total output, because with demand you need more brewing machines, so the maintenance will be more, but it has nothing to do with any particular coffee demand. So if any doubts for this topic? Any doubts or questions?
Okay, all right. So if you guys have any doubts about managerial costs, you can always put them in the chat, and I'm sure Nikita will be happy to answer them at the end of the session. But now we're going to move on to our last topic, which is profitability ratios. And profitability ratios are used to basically just conduct a ratio analysis, which is a financial analysis tool used to like interpret and assess the firm's financial statements. So as you remember, Manav mentioned financial statements at the start, which is your profit and loss, your balance sheet. So it's just used to like basically just have like a better idea of what those are actually telling us. And it just helps you evaluate the firm's financial performance by looking at trends and exposing various strengths and weaknesses of the firm. So they're very crucial when it comes to any kind of venture that you're doing with your business. And it also aids in decision making as it like basically takes like comparisons within the firm of different financial like data and just helps you make better decisions for your firm. And you can also use it to, I forgot to mention this one, but you can also use your financial like profitability ratio data and compare it to other companies within your market. So you can see how you're performing and whether you're, you're at par with those other companies, or whether you're underperforming, or if you've kind of overtaken your competition. So it's again a very useful tool to assess competition. And we have two different types. So it's gross profit margin and net profit margin, which I'll get into in a bit more detail now. Smith, next slide, please. Okay, so up first, we have gross profit margin, which is found by dividing the gross profit by the sales revenue. And this is always expressed as a percentage. And a gross profit margin is basically known as the measure of profitability, which shows the percentage of revenue that exceeds the cost of goods sold. And it also reflects how successful a company's executive management team is in generating revenue. And also just considering the costs involved in producing the products or services. So just take note of that formula. If you want to write it down somewhere, it would be helpful, because we're going to do some problem solving questions. So I'll just leave that on the screen for a few seconds and just like note it down. Okay, is everyone comfortable with the formula? Just nod or write it in the chat. All right, okay, cool. Let's move on. Okay, so we're just going to do a quick little problem. So you can either write this on a piece of paper, or you can put in your answer in the chat. That would be really helpful if you guys could do that. So the problem is a business has sales revenues of US dollars 100 million and gross profit of US dollars 70 million. Your job is to now calculate its gross profit margin using the formula that we gave earlier. So just to help you out, I'll repeat the formula. It's the gross profit divided by the sales revenue and then times by 100. As we said, it's always expressed as a percentage. So I'll give you guys a minute or two to just solve that. And just put your answer in the chat when you're done. All right, we'll just wait for a few more seconds. Thank you, Alice. Yeah, okay, so everyone's got it right, and that's great. So it's a pretty simple problem, but just to explain to anyone who didn't get it, since you're doing your gross profit divided by your sales revenue, your gross profit is the 70 million and your sales revenue is the 100. So you have to divide those two and then times it by 100 to give you 70%. So basically that means that the business generates a gross profit margin of 70%, which if you interpret that, it basically just translates and says that for every $100 of sales that the business makes, $70 of that is its gross profit. So the business's aim essentially is to like higher their gross profit or to help them pay their expenses. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, now we're just going to go into net profit margin, which is the measure of profits that remain after costs are deducted from the sales revenue. So again, this is once again expressed as a percentage, and the net profit margin is the ratio of net profits to the revenue for a company or business segment. So it illustrates how much each dollar in revenue collected by a company translates into profit. And the formula again is net profit before interest and tax divided by sales revenue times 100. So again, just please note down this formula before we move on to the problem. And once you've noted it down, just again nod or like put it down in the chat that you've got it. All right. Okay, great. So I'm going to move on now to the problem. Okay. So the problem is a firm has sales revenues of US dollars 150 million and a net profit before interest and tax of US dollars 75 million. Sorry about the typo on the slide. Your job is now to calculate its net profit margin. And like before, just once you're done, put your answer in the chat and we'll move on. Okay, thank you, Alice. Okay, so you guys have got the idea. So I'll just again say what it means like before. So that just means that the net profit margin is 50% and that for every $100 of sales revenue made, the business generates a net profit margin of $50. So it's quite self-explanatory. A high net profit could mean that a firm is meeting its expenses well. It could mean that the cash flow is overall indicating profitability, and it's also indicating that the firm knows how to manage their costs effectively, which is essential for a business to survive. So which is why businesses are constantly looking for ways to improve their net profit margin, as that directly leads to better financial performance. So is everyone clear with net profit and gross profit margin? If you have any questions, please put it in the chat below. Essentially, the best way to understand it is to just grasp the formula. There's not a lot of theory behind it. It's mostly just like the simple math. But it's also important to understand why we do calculate these two profitability ratios. Smith, next slide, please. Okay, so this brings us to the end of our module. Thank you so much for tuning in. Just before we go, here's on the slide, you can just see a recap of all the topics that we've covered, from accounting assumptions, financial statements, which had your balance sheet, profit and loss, and cash flow. We also covered break even and the formulas within break even and the formulas between profitability ratio and cash and revenue costs. So again, we will be sending a recording of this presentation out later, or you will have all of this information. So if there's any questions now, Smith, next slide. If there's any questions now, please feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand or just leave them in the chat and a member of our team will get back to you.
Okay, so the word of the day is partnership, and I've also noted it down on the chat function, so maybe you can copy it from there. And I will also give you guys the link to the post-session form. If you have time right now, then please fill this form right now, or maybe later whenever you can. But please know that this form will be open for 3 to 4 days and not more. There was no word of the day for yesterday because this is, one module which has 2 sessions. So for this particular module, the word of the day is partnership. Okay, guys.
All right, if there's no questions, once again, our team would just like to say thank you so much for joining us both yesterday and today. And we hope that this session was informative for you guys. And we hope that you enjoyed and learned a lot. And once again, just thank you so much. And we hope to see you for our other modules. So yeah, I mean, if you have any questions, feel free to stay back and we'll answer.
Alice, so difference between cash inflow and outflow and income statement is that in cash inflow and outflow, you only record cash transactions, whereas in income statement, you record both of them. I hope I'm clear.